can't change the world, but one person carrying a message can change.
At the age of 92, Willie Nelson has endured losses that few people are strong enough to carry. Burying friends, watching his fortune collapse, witnessing dreams turn into ashes. Now, in the final years of his life, he has spoken words that leave people stunned. When asked about death, Willie did not tremble. He answered firmly, as if he had stripped away every layer of armor after a lifetime of storms. And even more strikingly, he revealed for the first time the reason why he once wanted everything to end with a composure that felt almost unsettling.
You know, when I lost my son, that was a big one, and you know, everything else seems to pale.
That calm did not come from luck, but from a life that had been tested to its very limits. This is not a polished story about Willie Nelson. This is the raw truth of a man from whom life has taken nearly everything, and who came to understand that sometimes the greatest courage is not clinging to life at all costs, but peacefully accepting when it is time to let go. And before this story begins, if you are still here, leave a heart as a quiet sign that we are still listening to a life that deserves to be told. People know Willie Nelson as a symbol of freedom, with the serene smile of someone who has weathered every storm. But behind the stage lights lies another truth, that serenity was built upon a foundation of abandonment, despair, and the ashes of broken faith. In 1933, in the dying grip of the Great Depression, Willie Hugh Nelson was born in the poor rural town of Abbott, Texas. The world did not welcome him with velvet and silk, but with a brutal lesson etched into his very being. Nothing in this life lasts forever. When Willie was 6 years old, an age when a child needs protection more than ever, he stood silently and watched his mother's figure fade beyond the doorway. She left with a promise to return. But the promises of adults are sometimes nothing more than cheap scripts. She never came back. Then his father walked away as well, hastily putting on a new life, a new family that had no place for his old son. The 6-year-old boy was left behind to be raised by his grandparents, drowning in a question that would haunt him for half his life. What did I do wrong? How terrible must I be for even the people who brought me into this world not to keep me? That abandonment did not merely scratch the surface. It burrowed deep into his bones. It shattered the most primitive and fundamental trust a human being can have. And instead of being held and healed, that little boy was thrown straight into a harsh reality. Under the scorching Texas summer sun, young Willie picked cotton alongside migrant laborers. His small hands were torn open and bleeding from the sharp thorns scattered across the dry fields. Grueling labor can crush a child's body, but it forged in Willie a ruthless resilience. It taught him how to grit his teeth and walk through darkness when collapsing and giving up would have been far easier. And then he found music. On a shabby stage at the age of 10, the raw sound of his guitar rang out like a lifeline, pulling a drowning soul back to the surface. Under the lights, the crowd did not care who he was, did not need to know how his parents had discarded him. They shouted his name. They accepted him. Yet even as music became his final fortress of refuge, the scar of abandonment never truly disappeared. From that point on, Willie understood a cold truth. People will leave, promises will shatter, and relying on anyone but yourself is a deadly gamble. Stripped of everything at the age of 6, he tasted a bitter kind of freedom early in life, when you have nothing left to lose, you have nothing left to fear, and every attachment, even to life itself, can sometimes become a prison. By the 1960s, Willie draped himself in the cloak of fulfillment. He married Martha Matthews, a beautiful wife. He had 3 children whose laughter filled the air, and he made the pilgrimage to Nashville, the sacred ground of country music. But dreams could not be exchanged for bills that had already come due. While Willie Nelson's songs were being sung by major stars and generating millions of dollars, he himself was wasting away in poverty. The man who would later own multi-million-dollar empires was, at that time, knocking door to door, selling encyclopedias, standing at gas pumps amid the choking stench of fuel fumes, working late-night shifts as a DJ in exchange for a few meager dollars. There were weeks when he drove hundreds of miles just to have a demo rejected, then returned to curl up on a friend's torn sofa to sleep. At home, reality was even more merciless. Empty cupboards, bills piled high, red overdue notices glaring like a sentence tightening around every breath. At times, he had to pawn his guitar, the only thing that connected him to hope, just to pay the rent. Success then felt like a cruel joke, always within sight, yet never truly his. Martha grew weary. She had entrusted her life to a dreamer, only to receive a tattered reality in return. Sighs turned into biting words. Every time Willie dragged himself home after a failed audition, his wife's resentment stood ready to fire. The pressure crushed a man's pride. The musician, who could write lyrics that brought millions to tears, was utterly powerless when it came to finding a way to make his own wife smile. Willie turned to the only thing that did not judge him: whiskey. He drank as if trying to drown his entire heart in the abyss, burying his humiliation beneath alcohol and self-pity. And then, the abyss revealed itself. On a bitter winter night in Nashville, rejection letters fell as relentlessly as snow, bills stacked up with no way out, and Martha hurled at him words sharper and colder than any blade. Drunk, shattered, and utterly desperate, Willie Nelson staggered out into the night. In the darkest moment of his life, he made a decision whose echo would haunt him for years to come. He collapsed onto an icy highway, his back pressed against the frozen asphalt, closed his eyes, and silently waited for headlights to rush forward, crush his body, and end it all. But death turned away. The screech of brakes tore through the night, the driver's curses rang out and then dissolved into the wind. No wheels rolled over him, no mercy was granted. Lying there alone on the fragile border between life and death for hours, Willie suddenly grasped a suffocating truth. Sometimes the most intense desire to disappear is, in fact, the deepest expression of hidden weakness within a human being. Dragging his exhausted body back to the cold house, he found no arms waiting to embrace him. Martha stood there, but not in sympathy. She handed him ultimatums, reading aloud a long indictment of every failure he had ever carried on his shoulders. That marriage had died long ago, leaving behind only a rotting shell lying in wait for burial. That night, Willie Nelson realized that even love can turn icy after passing through too much pain. That the person who shares your bed, the one you once chose to reveal all your vulnerability to, can sometimes be the one who unintentionally presses hardest upon the deepest wounds in your heart. And he understood that behind the man who could sing about sorrow for millions of strangers was a soul that life had cracked again and again into small fragments, quietly and invisibly. But those fractures were not yet the harshest trial. In 1990, Willie Nelson, a cultural icon of America, the free-spirited figure known as an outlaw, was struck down by the government and reduced to little more than a debtor in chains. The real story had begun in the years when the glow of the stage lights inadvertently concealed a growing shadow behind him. While Willie Nelson tirelessly toured, living fully for music and his audience, he placed his trust in sharply dressed financial managers. Yet within that trust, his money was swept into reckless investments, risky schemes, and serious failures in meeting tax obligations. Then everything unraveled. In 1990, the Internal Revenue Service officially announced that he owed $32 million in back taxes. The figure was not merely shocking, it was like an earthquake threatening to sweep away the career, assets, and reputation he had built over decades. The Internal Revenue Service's asset seizure was cold and conducted strictly according to legal procedure, but for Willie Nelson, it was still a devastating blow. Government agents methodically inventoried, sealed, and removed everything of value. Gold records that once gleamed as proof of decades of dedication were taken down from the walls. The piano bearing the imprint of his hands through years of songwriting was removed from the familiar room where melodies that stirred millions of hearts had been born. The ranch in Texas, the peaceful refuge he considered a sanctuary after long years amid the noise of Nashville, was added to the list of assets to be liquidated. Even clothing and personal belongings tied to private memories were not spared from inventory. A great cultural icon of America, a man who had given the country invaluable artistic legacies, was suddenly cast out and treated no differently than a petty criminal. Standing amid the ruins of his own life, Willie absorbed the meaning of a line he once wrote. "The life of my heart. I burned away my childhood days. Amid that storm, lawyers and financial advisors shouted, urging him to choose the easiest path, declare bankruptcy." In America, the law always leaves a small door open for those who know how to step through just a few papers. And Willie Nelson could have wiped away the enormous debt, preserved his future, and started over. It was the most reasonable choice, the safest option for a man who was exhausted. But Willie Nelson shook his head. The pride of a wandering troubadour, the defiant spirit of someone who had risen from the bottom of society, would not allow him to take that escape. He declared that he would not let anyone else suffer on his behalf. If he owed, he would pay, even if that path pushed him toward hardship, humiliation, or cost him his final breath. And so a bitter irony emerged. The symbol of freedom suddenly became the legal debtor of the federal government. He released the album The IRS Tapes, Who Will Buy My Memories? More a sigh than a question. Every dollar of revenue from it flowed directly into the federal treasury. Willie Nelson watched as the possessions that had accompanied him throughout his life were auctioned off, coldly priced by people who had never known the stories behind them. In his later years, he once again had to carry his guitar from place to place, performing at modest fares and the smallest of stages, accepting any fee he could to chip away at the bottomless debt. Every song, every drop of sweat was silently swallowed by the monster named debt. Yet it was in that state of desperation, amid the ashes of what had once been his material empire, that Willie found clarity. By 1993, when the final dollar had been paid through extraordinary endurance, he understood that losing property did not mean losing himself. Houses, gold records, ranches, money, all could vanish. But music, the thing that had sustained him since his youth, was something no power could confiscate. And that fall made him realize clinging too tightly to glory only locks the soul behind its own door. From that darkness, Willie quietly rose. No noise, no complaint, only the steady perseverance of a wandering singer. He continued to tour tirelessly, singing wherever he could, gathering each dollar through melodies steeped in the dust of the road. And now, though his wealth was no longer vast, he had reclaimed what mattered most: freedom. A freedom his own feet had walked through storms to recover. But fate seemed unwilling to stop with Willie Nelson. Just as he had learned to accept material loss, life unexpectedly struck him with an even heavier trial. Only then did he understand that losing $32 million was merely an external blow. The real pain was still waiting ahead. The 25th of December, 1991, should have been a warm day in the Willie Nelson household. Christmas bells rang everywhere. Gift boxes rested quietly beneath the pine tree. Children ran in circles with bright, innocent laughter. In the studio, a gospel music project was waiting for Willie and his son Billy a chance to mend the distance between them through music. And yet, instead of togetherness, what knocked on their door that day was a loss no one could soothe. Billy Nelson, the eldest son who carried his father's last name, had long lived within silences no one else could see. On the outside, people expected from him a confident smile, an easygoing presence, and a brilliance of talent that mirrored his legendary father. But inside, weariness and sorrow had been accumulating over the years. He inherited his father's sensitivity, yet he did not have the means to transform his wounds into music to save himself. While Willie could pour his pain into every measure of a song, Billy felt himself slowly fracturing. His father's glow of fame unintentionally became a vast shadow cast over his own life. Medication no longer worked. Therapy sessions passed like faint echoes. The weight of expectation pressed heavier and heavier upon shoulders already exhausted. At the age of 33, Billy chose to end his life. On a day when millions of families across America were gathered, opening gifts and sharing warmth, he decided to leave this world in silence. Not because of a sudden accident or a prolonged illness, but as a deliberate choice made by a soul that had grown utterly tired. A choice that the Father who loved him until the end of his days could never fully understand and could never change. The call bearing the news came on a quiet afternoon. Willie Nelson, who had just struggled to rise again after devastating financial losses, felt himself collapse once more. The news struck the most fragile place in a father's heart. The funeral unfolded in an air thick with grief. Around him were whispered sympathies, uneasy glances about the pressure of carrying a legendary name, and questions about the signs of depression the family might have recognized sooner. Amid the crowd, Willie sat motionless, his mind replaying brief conversations between father and son, searching his memory for a moment when he might have done something differently, a question asked, an embrace offered, or simply being present more often. Bobby Nelson, his sister and closest musical companion, quietly watched her brother as though seeing a part of his soul fall away. They had walked through every rise and fall together, the brilliant stage lights, the days of poverty, even unnamed wounds. But this loss was entirely different. No song was powerful enough to ease the emptiness left by the death of a child. Willie and Bobby did not choose long conversations or public displays of tears as release. They chose silence, a silence in which every breath carried understanding. Bobby knew that was how Willie faced things, feeling pain to its deepest core, yet keeping it for himself. Billy's passing, following the material ruin that had come before, brought Willie a bitter realization deeper than any consolation. It made him understand that some losses never become lessons or strength. Some pains do not harden you. They simply leave behind spaces that never heal. They follow a person for life, like shards buried deep within the mind. After walking through the two harshest trials of his life, losing his wealth and losing his own flesh and blood, Willie came to a quiet truth. Human beings are profoundly fragile before the uncertainties of fate. And sometimes, the most courageous and compassionate act is not to blame or to cling desperately, but to accept reality, to understand the reasons behind a desperate choice, and to learn how to let go. Only after facing pain to its very end can one find another kind of freedom. The calm to keep living, more gently, even though the wound still remains. The man who had buried his own son and watched his material empire crushed into ashes ultimately realized a supreme power. When you have nothing left to cling to, you have nothing left to fear. And it was this ruthless freedom that turned Willie Nelson into a slow-burning fuse. The music industry, especially the world of country music, has long favored safety. It prefers predictable faces, artists who know how to please the majority and follow established molds. But Willie Nelson did not choose that path. He refused to become a proper template, refused to live according to the expectations of those who brought him fame. While many of his peers chose stability to protect their careers, Willie was willing to step outside his comfort zone and speak the uncomfortable truths he believed in. In the late 1960s, American society was still heavy with division. Country music was almost entirely the domain of white performers, where racial boundaries functioned like an unspoken law. During a performance in Texas, under the expectant gaze of a conservative audience, Willie did something that silenced the entire hall. He invited Charlie Pride, a brilliant black singer who had endured significant hardship, to join him on stage. Willie even stepped forward and placed a friendly kiss on Charlie's lips, not to provoke shock, but to affirm respect between human beings beyond all boundaries. The act immediately ignited controversy. Many Southern radio stations pulled his music. Some performance contracts were canceled. Letters of protest and threats grew more frequent. Yet Willie did not retreat. He stood beside Charlie Pride, defending him as he would a friend and an artist he deeply respected. To Willie, fame and money were insignificant compared to what he believed was right. As the years passed, his hair and the corners of his eyes bore more marks of time, but his independent spirit and frankness never faded. Willie's political involvement remained sharp and sincere. While many artists chose to hide behind empty praise to please the public, Willie chose to speak about difficult truths, pointing out injustices and wounds society preferred to ignore. Willie Nelson has never been afraid to voice his views. He openly supported Democratic candidates such as Dennis Kucinich and Beto O'Rourke, organized fundraising concerts, and spoke out against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. For him, the guitar was not merely an instrument, but a means to call for peace and challenge militaristic thinking. This caused many conservative fans who once saw him as an icon to turn their backs, branding him a traitor. But Willie understood exactly what he was doing. He was simply preserving the upright values his family had taught him since childhood, to stand with the vulnerable and to speak the truth without fear. Willie's candor extended beyond politics. He was also regarded as one of the pioneering voices in the debate over marijuana legalization. Long before society began to grow more open, Willie publicly acknowledged his use of it as a protest against what he saw as unfair regulations.
I think marijuana is probably the safest medicine that you can take.
He was arrested multiple times and had to deal with the law, yet those troubles never made him waver. At one point, he even smoked a joint on the roof of the White House during the administration of Jimmy Carter, an act that became a peculiar legend in popular culture. But Willie did not stop there. In 2006, he released the song "Cowboys Are Frequently Secretly Fond of Each Other," a playful yet bold track that touched on a topic country music at the time largely avoided romantic feelings between men. The song immediately stirred major controversy. Many traditional fans objected. Numerous radio stations refused to air it. Yet Willie remained calm. He believed in what he was saying and viewed music as a way to open necessary conversations. By 2018, in the midst of a deeply divided election season, he released "Vote Them Out," a song carrying a strong message of change. The reaction was even more intense. Some people took his CDs and T-shirts bearing his image into their yards and burned them. They burned their own memories, as if trying to erase the past in which they had admired him. Yet watching such scenes, Willie likely only smiled gently. He understood the value of honesty. For him, it was better to be misunderstood than to remain silent merely to preserve the approval of the majority. Willie Nelson's journey against the tide reveals a distinctive kind of courage. Courage is not only facing danger, it is daring to speak what you believe before those who once supported you. It is preserving the integrity of your soul, even when doing so makes the road lonelier. Sometimes, the price of living truthfully is not measured in material loss or reputation, but in the willingness to walk alone with an unbroken conscience. And yet, just when Willie believed he had endured enough storms, fate quietly prepared an even more merciless trial, a test arising from the very body he had always trusted. The cruelest irony that creation can inflict on a music legend is not to take away his hearing like Ludwig van Beethoven, but to squeeze the very lungs inside his chest. For an artist who built an entire career and stitched history itself through his voice, the lungs are not merely a biological organ. They are lifeblood, soul, the foundation of everything. But for Willie Nelson, that organ gradually turned into an airless prison, a suspended sentence hanging over him for decades. And most bitter of all, the marijuana smoke that once helped soothe his mind in his darkest days quietly wore him down, gnawed at him, and threatened his life day after day. That sentence did not wait until old age to arrive. In 1981, during a vacation in Maui, while Willie Nelson's body was still relaxing in the crystal-clear waters of Hawaii, his left lung suddenly gave out, without a single warning sign. A sharp pain pierced through his chest, making every breath heavy, and the familiar voice that once flowed so easily reduced to broken, strained sounds. His lung collapsed. And that was only the beginning of a long, punishing journey. Years of constant smoking had left unmistakable damage. Willie was diagnosed with emphysema, a disease tied to the gradual weakening of the lungs, irreversible by nature. The man who once stood strong on stage for hours at a time now struggled even to walk across a living room. Every step felt weighed down. Every breath was as if it had to be dragged through a rusted iron lock. Pneumonia returned again and again, draining what little strength he had left. Friends and family stood nearby, silently watching the image of a musical monument slowly shrink inward, frail and exhausted. By 2015, his health entered an alarming stage. With no other choice, Willie decided to try stem cell therapy, a method that had never been used for his case before. Many tours had to be canceled, leaving fans heartbroken. But at that point, the stage was no longer the priority. Life itself was the only thing worth holding on to. The doctors were clear. Without surgery, he would not be able to return to music. You would think that was harsh enough, but in 2022, when Willie turned 90, COVID-19 struck. The virus slipped onto his tour bus in Nashville and attacked the respiratory system that was already fragile. In the middle of the night, Willie woke up in severe respiratory distress. His wife, Annie D'Angelo, turned their home into an emergency treatment station, ventilators, monoclonal antibodies, nebulizer systems running day and night. She stayed by the bed, steady and terrified, watching the strongest man in her life become weak, fighting to claim each breath. Through astonishing endurance, Willie Nelson made it through once again. But this confrontation stripped away every illusion he still had about death. Years of battling illness taught him that death does not always look heroic the way it does in movies. There is no hazy light, no last words drenched in philosophy. Sometimes, death is simply the moment when the body no longer has the strength to inhale one more time. A natural ending, quiet and plain like the biological machine inside a human being softly shutting down, little by little. The man who had lost almost everything finally understood something simple. Death is not the enemy. What is more terrifying is pain and the desperate struggle to cling to life when the body is already exhausted. After times when he had to gather every ounce of willpower just to take a single breath, Willie came to understand the true meaning of release. Sometimes, closing your eyes and accepting a natural ending is not giving up, but an act of gentleness toward yourself. And now, after making peace with the idea of death, Willie Nelson quietly opens his eyes to face another reality, one just as silent and no less lonely. In the world of country music legends, he has become a fragile, haunting kind of living relic. The last one left. The Highwaymen, the supergroup that once shook America, the symbol of four rebellious artists who helped shape an entire era, now exists only as memory. Of them, only one figure remains standing on stage, holding the familiar guitar, like the last keeper of the flame of an age that has slowly drawn to a close. In those calm, measured breaths, he continues to sing as if he is sending off an entire golden chapter of music into its final evening. Johnny Cash was the first to leave the game. In 2003, diabetes and respiratory failure turned a once powerful voice into something heartbreakingly weary. His final performances left everyone who watched with a lump in their throat, a body growing weaker, but a spirit still bright and clear until the very end. Waylon Jennings had gone a year earlier, also because of complications from diabetes, a disease he had fought for far too long. To Willie, Waylon was not just a colleague, but the friend who understood him most deeply. They wrote music together, roamed thousands of miles, and shared moments that only those who lived outside the boundaries of the rules could truly understand. When Waylon died, Willie felt as if he had lost a part of his family. Then in 2024, Kristofferson also left this world at the age of 88. He was the youngest in the group, the one the other three had once thought would live the longest. Yet it was Willie who stood before one more gravestone, quietly saying goodbye to another piece of his own past. At those funerals, Willie gradually understood a simple truth. Being the last survivor is not a victory, but a bitterness that is hard to name. Each death is like a gentle but razor-sharp reminder of his own limits, and at the same time, it is a lesson in legacy what remains when a life comes to its close. Willie said that Kristofferson left behind a treasure of songs for those still here to keep singing as long as we're still here. That line became both beautifully moving and deeply sad. Willie knows his time is not long, and he is gradually racing against the years he has left. But watching each friend depart, he learned something essential about leaving in peace. Cash sang until nearly his final breath. Jennings kept writing music even while his body hurt. Kristofferson held on to creativity until the end of his life. They did not fight death, they accepted it as part of a life lived fully. Willie began to realize that death is not something that comes only for one person, but something that happens around us every day until it is our turn. And often, the fear of death is worse than death itself. The waiting, the anxiety, the clinging, those are what create suffering. But when we accept the limits of human life, we find peace. He understands that his brothers did not die for nothing. They left him lessons in dignity, in courage during the final years. And because of that, every time Willie steps onto a stage, it is as if he carries the voice of the whole group with him. Every song is a tribute. Every performance is an act of remembrance. He is no longer performing alone, he is performing for all those who came before. Willie Nelson today is no longer just himself. He is the last keeper of the flame of a musical era that is already closed. That does not make him sad. On the contrary, it makes him grateful. Being the last person to witness that beauty is also a gift from fate. And when his moment comes, he believes he will meet his old friends again, carrying stories and melodies he never had the chance to finish telling. The last one of eternity is not lonely, he feels honored. At 92, Willie Nelson has reached something not everyone gets to have: absolute honesty with life and death. His calm does not come from fatigue or despair, but from a long life that has washed away every illusion. He has lost his fortune, lost loved ones, watched his body fade, and still found a kind of peace within. He understands that everything people cling to, money, fame, even longevity, is temporary. Fighting that only hurts more. Accepting it opens the door to freedom. And that is why Willie is not afraid to die. Not because he wants to leave, but because he is no longer afraid to live. When you have lost everything that can be lost, what remains, music, love, connection, becomes steadier than ever. And Willie's calm teaches us something profound. The bravest thing is not resisting death, but living fully even as death draws near. Willie Nelson has done that. He sings, records, and keeps walking his road not to run from death, but as if he is walking alongside it. Each song could be a farewell. Each performance could be the last. And to him, every moment is a gift worth receiving. And that is the portrait of Willie Nelson at 92. Not a superhuman legend, but a human being who has endured enough loss, enough wounds, and still quietly stood back up, picked up his guitar, and sang. People see an old man with silver hair and a gentle smile, but behind that smile is a soul that has let go of what life has taken again and again, and still chosen to stay with music and kindness. Perhaps that is his greatest legacy, a reminder that a life full of scars can still be beautiful, as long as we dare to live honestly and keep walking forward with calm, even knowing that, in the end, the curtain will fall. If you feel this story is worth listening to, please like and subscribe so you can continue traveling with us on the journeys ahead. Thank you for staying until the end.